Welcome to the Flower Essence Podcast, and join us on an exploration of the healing wisdom of flowers.
With combined decades of experience in the study and practice of flower essence therapy, I, Kathleen Aspens, and co-host Rokana Feld guide you to reconnect to nature with these potent vibrational remedies. Hi, welcome to the Flower Essence Podcast. Today we are going to be talking about some of the basic issues of flower essences. What are they? How to use them? Just really getting started with the basics. So nice to see you again, Ro.
Hello, Kathleen. Great to be here.
Yeah. So we should start with the very first question of what are they? What are these things we call flower essences? You want to lead in?
Yeah, well, they are so difficult to define because they're a vibrational medicine. So, I call them gentle botanical extracts that are made from flowers. They're subtle but powerful in balancing the body, and they work on the level of sort of the mind, body, and spirit. They're different than essential oils and different than herbal tinctures or herbal extracts. And we could go into a little bit more about those technicalities. But the main thing is that they're more closely aligned to homeopathy. The way that I see it is being a highly diluted aqueous infusion.
Yeah, I like to think about it as the spirit of the plant in a liquid base. So
yeah, I like that.
Making a connection to the energetic wisdom and intelligence from nature of a particular plant. But yeah, I think it's a good place to start, just sort of defining, that they're not essential oils. With the terminology, it gets very confusing sometimes having the conversation about flower essences, and people think, I love the lavender oil. That's the most wonderful thing. And I agree. It is a wonderful thing, but it's very, very different than flower essences. You have this wonderful diagram, and I'm sure we'll put this in the show notes, talking about or showing the differences between the different forms of herbal medicine, and how there's this spectrum of herbal medicine that has flower essences being all the way on one end and essential oils being all the way on the other. I really enjoyed seeing the way you put that together because it's so clear.
Yeah, I mean, everything depends on the dose, and it's a little oversimplified in that scenario. But just as a visual in showing, where the opposite ends of the spectrums and everything in between, I think it packs a powerful punch. So thank you for that feedback.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I was going to say, every plant, in my opinion, coming also from the herbalist and aromatherapy world, every plant medicine has an energetic effect as well as a chemical effect in the body. And then when we get down to flower essences, as with homeopathy, we've sort of refined it from we've removed the chemical effect, and we're only looking at the energetic effect.
Yeah, interesting. And I think that even more, it's that's what we're looking for out of the flower essence, is that we're really connecting deeply to the spirit of the plant, to the energy medicine of the plant, rather than that we're looking for that chemical input. But I think that's a good way to differentiate. I think that really intentional herbal medicine and really intentional aromatherapy can be amazing because they can have an energetic imprint as well. But flower essences, we are working with just simply, strictly, magically, that energetic imprint. But I think that the biggest thing that I always like to think about is that there's no potential for harm. You don't really need to worry about, are there contraindications? Is it a problem to use with an infant, an elder, a pet? I think that you're always safe using flower essences, which I think is a really important feature to me.
Yeah, and that's an aspect that makes them so much more accessible too to anyone. I think that's part of what Dr. Bach had in mind, that he didn't have to work with dangerous substances, and you don't have to look up prescription medicine interactions when we're working with flower essences like we do with herbs and essential oils. So, you know, there's all sorts of levels we can go to in working with these as far as the therapeutic effects and our the way we as practitioners do flower essence therapy, but at the same time anyone can just start where they are and pick up a flower essence and use it.
Yeah, it is really an accessible way of working with plants and plant medicine. So I think that's right. You can work with it from so many different levels, whether you don't really know much of anything at all and you just feel drawn to a particular plant, versus all the way to the other end of being a flower essence therapist, and combining really carefully and intentionally in order to help somebody progress through whatever challenges they might be going through. So there are a lot of different access points for flower essences all along the way. I think that usually I would start with a conversation about, when I'm talking to somebody about flower essences, is have they ever tried Rescue Remedy? Are they familiar with that particular combination? Because that's oftentimes a very good starting point for working with flower essences. The 5-flower remedy is what Dr. Bach called it. And I think that it's a really great entry point. It's a good thing that people should have on hand as a first aid remedy. I really like to keep one in my purse, keep one sort of in the kitchen, because things happen a lot in life. And it's really good to have your first aid kit handy. So
Mm-hmm.
5-flower formula, which is known by the brand name Rescue Remedy, they're essentially the same thing. Different companies and slightly different makers have different qualities, perhaps. But 5-flower formula is really helpful for crisis. I think about it for any kind of a shock or terror. Are there other circumstances that you like to think about it for?
Yeah, interestingly, I actually use it a lot for anxiety when
Mm,
just that pops up unexpectedly. And in a way, that's a certain form of shock or terror.
yeah.
It's not like car accident level, but it's the little, just a random thought that prompts a reaction in the body, a stress response. I find Rescue Remedy is great for just so many things um, that are like that.
Yeah, just to kind of pull you out of that cycle of
Just as
that
yeah,
thrilling fear that sort of throws you up and out of your body,
yeah,
whether it's small or big. Yeah.
absolutely. And I've had my own struggles with anxiety throughout my life, and at one point I was taking anti-anxiety medication,
Mhm.
and then I decided to get off of it, which is very difficult because
Yeah.
it throws you into um, rebound anxiety. And actually, the Rescue Remedy was right there in my toolkit and used often and with
Yes.
great results.
Yes.
So, and even now that I know so much more, obviously, about like how to um, refine a formula for somebody's specific needs, including myself, um, I still rely on those 5 flowers so often.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good thing to remember, because a lot of people have different moments of anxiety, whether it's something that's sort of full-fledged part of their lives regularly, or whether it might just be something more transitory. And it's just good to know that it exists, that you can have it handy, keep it around, and then just take it as often and whenever you need it. I think the next piece is that you can't overdo it, really. Taking it regularly, even taking it every few minutes when you're in the midst of a little crisis or a big crisis, is really the best way to go. I think that flower essences, they work on this vibrational principle. So kind of like the more often you take it rather than the more volume you take is another thing to talk about, because the next question is usually sort of like, what sort of dose should I take? How many drops? And it's so hard for us to get sort of Western minded people to be thinking that the number of drops doesn't really matter that much.
Mhm.
1 drop or 10 drops, it's kind of the same, because it's more that vibrational principle of, did it enter your field? Did it enter maybe your body or on your skin? And how often? Because I usually use the framework of like a singing bowl. Have you ever felt a singing bowl chiming kind of, and you feel that vibration kind of flow through your whole body, and your body resonates in tandem with the bowl or the chime?
Uh-huh.
And I think that the essences are like that, where on a sort of a imperceptible level, are we're vibrating along with that essence. And then we might fall out of that vibration. And then we need a little dose in order to kind of come back into that vibration. That's
I
kind of the
love
way I
that.
think about it.
I love that analogy. And I like to say less is more, but more often is better.
Perfect.
And that's, yeah, so that's what I tell people. It's not the amount, it's how often and what your frame of mind is when you take it.
Oh, yes.
That helps a lot.
Yeah. What do you like to talk to people about the frame of mind concept? Because I think
Mm.
that that's really important, that we're not taking it mechanically, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I, I tell people that the best if all they can do is just take a couple deep breaths,
Mm.
uh, then that's 100% better than nothing. And if they can say a positive affirmation while they're doing it and really feel that, like what the intention is for the blend, and then but saying an affirmation for that intention is making it real for them and puts them all in alignment. The flowers, the person, the energy, everything gets in alignment. So I usually work with a client to come up with one to three um, positively stated affirmations in the style of Louise Hay, which I studied a
Yeah.
long time ago, and I resonate with the way that she instructs the wording, it being in the present moment,
Hmm.
and and so forth. So, yeah, then if the client can do that, that makes everything stronger. It makes it they don't have to. Obviously, we can use essences on animals, and you can speak more about that. But I think the difference is that animals don't have negative conditioning patterns that could block it.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I love your emphasis on intentions, because that's also part of the practice where I work with clients, is creating an intention statement. And I'd love to have that conversation at some point with you about how we craft them, because I have opinions about what I think is really important, and I'd really love to share those with you and hear what yours are. But I think that for me, I really like to, if I have a personal relationship with the plant, is to recall that plant. Even if I've only seen a picture, or even saying the name can be the medicine too. So
Mhm.
each time I take the essence, I try to recall that. If I'm taking an individual flower, or if I'm taking 5 flower, I'll kind of reflect on the reality of that connection. And I think that that helps to anchor it. I think that intentions are also really helpful. There's just a lot of different access points that you can use to work with essences, but I think that the more we connect with the plants, the more we connect with that intelligence in nature, the more will happen. So I think we're both on the same page about avoiding that kind of mechanical sort of, you just need to put it in you and then move on. But taking that moment to take a little breath, kind of just center, maybe to touch your heart, and remember what you're asking for from these plants, because this is, you're interfacing with nature intelligence. You're not just sort of treating it like a thing or an it. You're actually connecting to a level of intelligence, and even perhaps you could think about it as a personality. I'm asking help from oak. I'm connecting to the archetype of oak here, and I'm looking for support. But so I think those are some of the access points I think that will help to get the best results and the best. Um, I don't know. I guess results is the word. I guess I don't have a better word than
Yeah.
results, but I'm always a little sensitive.
Outcome, maybe.
There you go. That's the word I
Yeah.
was looking for. I think it's always a little tricky, because we are sort of so colonized by the Western mindset of, whenever I've heard somebody say, "Well, I tried Rescue Remedy and it just didn't work." And I want to have more of a conversation most of
Yeah.
the time. Like, so what were you expecting? Were you expecting it to kind of whack you over the head, like maybe a pharmaceutical might?
Right.
Do you have that conversation with people sometimes?
Yeah, but I wanted to also go back to the nature intelligence because that is another way that I work with clients is when I create a custom formula, I usually have one sort of highlighted plant that I'll tell them has stepped up to be their plant ally for the month, and I'll get that when I'm doing the consultation. So I give examples or ways, ideas for people to connect with that. Like oak for is a great example because if you could pick up an acorn and put it in your pocket for that month that you're working with this remedy that has oak in it, then that is a way to connect. And you can do that anytime you're in the office. You don't have to be on a nature walk. If there's a, so I try to think of, and it obviously it's different for everyone and depends on the essences in the formula, but I try to find something that that ally has, or even it's just a picture that they can find and carry with them, save it to their phone, look at their phone, and throughout the month cultivate that awareness of that plant. And if they can go out and sit next to it and meditate with it in nature, that's the ultimate. I think that's the best thing to do. But not everybody can do that. So we get creative, and there's other ways that we can bring nature around with us if we can't go to it.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why it was so important to me when I created my brand, my label and my brand is that I really wanted those images of the flowers to be right there on the label. And I have found that just looking at a label with a flower image on it completely brings you into the state of connecting with the plant. So, just looking at it, just gazing upon it is the medicine as well. Doesn't even necessarily need to be open. So I think that, yeah, that visual connection and the mental connection and then a physical connection, if you can create one, that practice of carrying a little herb bundle in your pocket or under your pillow is another wonderful way to sort of layer in that benefit of connecting to that plant on the spirit basis.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And your pictures are always so wonderful, your
Thank you.
photographs.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I really enjoy kind of diving into what it's trying to speak. For me, the images are a practice of conversation, and I'm always looking to catch that perfect moment where the plant is really emitting that vibration and that energy right on through. So I think that there, as far as how to use flower essences, there are a lot of different access points and a lot of different ways to use them. As practitioners, we create dosage bottles. What is your practice on creating a dosage bottle for a client?
Yeah. I'm not sure what you mean by
Oh,
that.
I think it's useful to just talk about dilutions. If you go to the shop or you purchase online, whatever, you would buy an individual flower essence, a single flower, as we would call it, where it's just one plant in the bottle. So, say we're looking at borage. So, if we were to go and get a bottle of borage, that's usually bottled up at the what's called the stock dilution. And the stock dilution can be diluted one further time into a dosage for daily use, or it can be used right out of the bottle. So this is where flower essences start to differ from homeopathics, where there aren't the same types of dosing strategies, but you can use either the stock level or you can dilute it into what's termed a dosage level. So if you had your bottle of stock remedy, and you can just go ahead and take 2 drops out of that, or take 2 drops and put them in a water bottle and then sort of drink little sips of it during the day. That's one way to interact with the flower essence. But if you're working with a number of different essences and you really want to dive deep into working with them over time, it's useful to create a dosage bottle. And what I do to make a dosage bottle, and I think this is fairly standard, is I create a 1 ounce bottle which has about 1/4 brandy and then 3/4 spring water, and then 2 drops of each essence that in the blend to create it. And so it's just a few drops. It's a very small amount. It's a dilution, which is so hard to believe that that could possibly work, but it
Mhm.
does. It's amazing. And so that can create sort of a daily use blend. And usually that bottle, I recommend to dose out at 4 drops 4 times a day. And that is a wonderful way to take your essences. Do you use that sort of
Yeah.
structure?
Yeah, it's similar, except that the difference is, so I definitely, yeah, I just wasn't sure where you were going with that question. Sorry.
Hmm.
The 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 way that I approach making a custom formula for a client, I throw a little numerology in there.
Oh, interesting.
So depending on what they're dealing with, it's really it's hard to explain my process, but I may feel like the number 9, let's say they're going through a transition or they're dealing with grief, and the number 9 might be coming up. And maybe I'll have 9 stock essences that I'm using in that formula. And then the number of drops for each one, I will generally make sure that it adds up to a number that then becomes a 9 in numerology.
How interesting. Isn't that creative?
And it is, so it's highly variable, and all the formulas aren't necessarily going to be made up of 9. um, I think most of the time I try to stick with 5 or 7. I like the odd numbers. And uh, it and it just, yeah, it really depends on what we've talked about and the number coming up for me, and then that will usually break down to be 2 to 4 drops per stock. So it ends up being pretty similar, but I just kind of like to feel out the numerology of it from an intuitive standpoint.
How interesting. Yeah, it's so funny how every practitioner that I know and that I've talked to, it's like everybody has a little different flair. So it's really fun to learn what your flair is.
Yeah.
My formulas tend to be a little larger. I tend to have usually around a dozen, 15 different essences, and they can be kind of all over the map: flowers, gems, and environmental or nature essences. So, and I think that that's one of the things that when you first start practicing or you first get into essences, way before practicing, is you look at those lists or go online and research, and it's like everything seems relevant, and it might very well be. But it's really useful to start paring it down, and try to really dial into what specifically that you're needing. But I think that premise of how we create formulas and how to combine essences might be a larger topic that we'll dive into on another day. Do you think?
Yeah, yeah. So many things are coming up that we could talk about with that. We
Yeah,
should
it's a big
definitely
one.
do an episode on that.
Cool. Yeah, and I just would talk about the preservative, that the brandy is there just as a preservative. And I have clients, or different applications where it's more appropriate to use a different preservative. So vegetable glycerin is always a really good way if you're working with the littles, whether they're children, or animals. That can be a really useful way to go. And usually I use about a little more than a third or half of a bottle of glycerin to give it a good preservative. You can also use apple cider vinegar. And then also another option is to simply preserve with nothing and keep it in the fridge and use it within about a week or so. You wouldn't
Yeah.
want anything to go weird.
Yeah, I have a couple flower essence bases that I use, and I do like using organic vegetable glycerin. Uh, but so I'll either do a combo with glycerin and alcohol, or I'll do a combo with glycerin and vinegar for
Mm,
people who absolutely don't want the alcohol.
yeah. And another thing that I always like to remember is that flower essences also work really well topically. So you don't even need to have a tiny amount of alcohol entering your system if you use. You can use the essences on acupressure points. You can use them in a mist and sort of mist it over your heart or over your head. Just as long as it enters your field, really, that is sufficient, and that will do the trick. Yeah. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of ways to use essences, and that may be another fun topic. I love to use topical on animals. I find that they really like that. And I'd use not glycerin, I would use alcohol, or just diluted in water. And then you can just wet your hand and you can literally just pet it into their coat. And that way, my client and the animal are both getting the impact of the essences, which is
Lovely.
sometimes
Yeah.
a nice way to go for the two of them.
How else do you use them?
I think that taking a bath with essences is amazing. And that can be a really nice deep dive to help sort of really anchor the essences into your system. I recommend my clients to take their first dose, first thing in the morning when they wake up, and then the last one just before bed. And then the other two doses during the day. I think that 4 times a day cycle is really useful, but not everybody it's very convenient. So it can be really nice to put those other two doses in your water bottle, because almost everybody's into a water bottle habit these days or carry something around with them. And you can just have that, put those doses in your water bottle and just be sipping it all day. And you're getting your essences with every little sip.
Yeah. And I actually usually put them in a sprayer, a misting 1 ounce mister that people can just spray right into their mouth. So it can just be portable, kept in a purse. And that's another easy way to do it.
Yeah, that's very handy, and I think that more and more I like to use the little Mister Top, because it doesn't get, there's no chance of dropping it and it
Mhm.
getting disgusting, and all sorts of things can happen with droppers.
Yeah.
They end up in your mouth, and
Right.
that's not really great sanitary. So,
And it doesn't
agreed.
look as weird when you're out in public.
That's true. That's true. Yes, nobody needs to see what you're doing when you just do a little mist in your mouth. People think that you're doing a breath spray or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, and I think that maybe we could talk about kind of the difference between using a single flower or connecting to an individual plant, that anyone can do, and then what is flower essence therapy, and there's a whole spectrum in between one and the other. But what do you see flower essence therapy as being about?
Making that connection with the intelligence of nature in order to move the dial in what uh, is happening internally with the client. Yeah,
Yeah.
what is your elevator speech for flower essence therapy, Kathleen? Since I'm kind of flubbing it.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's I think that it is hard to sum up into an elevator speech, but I think that the biggest thing is that you're working systematically, that you're working over time with somebody. I think that flower essences can be used in a symptomatic kind of way, where today I'm feeling this and I'm going to take this essence, and that's a perfectly acceptable use. But working more deeply and working with layers and working in sort of a structure of a continuity, where 1 month we're working on one level, and then as that level heals and releases, then something new will emerge, and that next piece can be taken care of in the next cycle of formulas. So I work with clients on a monthly basis over a period of time, and I think that it's amazing to see the progress that can happen. And if you're just kind of working with essences sort of in a, I'm feeling this, I want to feel something different, take these drops today, you never really end up with those really deep and profound inner changes and restructurings that can take place with connecting deeply with plants over time,
Mhm.
in structured formulas. That's kind of a basic description of it. But I think that concept of over time and on a continuity basis, those are two really crucial factors.
Yeah, and the changes are so subtle yet profound. What do you tell people if they ask, is it working, or what to expect?
Yeah, I would start by quoting Dr. Bach, where he would say that how long to take an essence is for 1 month for every year it's been a problem.
Yeah.
There's always that little moment of the mental math goes through and go, oh my God, that's such a long time I'm going to
Yeah.
need to be taking this. But what I find is that there's something magical about 6 months on an essence, and oftentimes we've traveled around enough cycles in that 6 month period where you may have been able to anchor that new pattern, that healed pattern, strongly enough that you don't need to keep taking that on a daily basis, but you may need to kind of come back to it periodically or seasonally or however things come up. I think that that's one of the frameworks. I think that what I usually find is people start feeling better with whatever the issue might be in a couple of weeks, but it's just as easy to pop right back to where they
Mhm.
were before. And if you just stop taking it because it's like, I'm feeling better now, you really miss the opportunity to create a really deep and inner restructuring and change that really that's the magic of essences. That's really what they do the best is they really can help you create those deep and profound and lasting changes. I think that part of my work is to not mirror those changes, but to witness those changes in
Mm.
people and to really recognize, oh my gosh, a month ago, this is where you were, and now you're here. And, a year ago, you were over here, and, look at how much has changed in your life. I think that any kind of process where somebody is attending to where they are, whether they do sort of a little journaling process or just reflective with a friend, it's a really useful thing to have somebody else um, see where we are because human nature, whatever's bothering us today is what's foremost and front of mind. And what bothered us yesterday, we've totally forgotten about pretty much. And so
Mhm.
each time, in essence, works so it's in those terms that they're a little bit awkward, but I feel better from this, and now I'm going to be worrying about this thing. But it's really useful to always check back in. What was it that bothered you so much before? Oh yeah, I haven't even thought about that in a month. Those are the remarkable moments.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying about over time. I think about it in terms of it takes 21 days to change a habit. So at the very minimum, you'd want to be taking it for 3 weeks um, or a month. And so that kind of goes with addictions, addictions and changing habits. That 21-day timeline has been bandied around, but I feel to me like that's when you really feel it click is right around that time.
Hmm.
And then if people stick with it for longer than, like you said, people, you can slide back into old ways if not continuing the process. And I really see after 3 months the amazingness that happens. The real catalyzing change seems to have taken hold. And I worked with someone recently to quit smoking, and that's the exact process. That 21 days was um, things changed, everything was looking good, but they knew that they had done that before and that they would slide back. And then they kept with, so that spurred them to keep with it and to keep with the practice and have that in the toolbox. And 3 months went by, everything is great. And 6 months went by and still using it here and there, but less and less. And the change has taken hold.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't that amazing how it's I think that that process of change, that process of changing a habit is so often viewed to be a matter of that involves willpower.
Oh, yeah.
And I just don't think so. I don't think that you really can change just on willpower because there's, what is underneath that habit? What is underneath that need to smoke or whatever it might be that you want to change? And if we meet that part of you, if we meet that need as being a legitimate call for something, and meet it with an essence that will help to soothe that part, all of a sudden the need for willpower goes away because it's not about a top down kind of approach of monitoring and changing behavior. It's about sort of a bottom up organic life filled approach of what am I choosing, what am I deciding to do instead. Do you
Yeah, absolutely. And then it might be a good moment to outline too that um, to help talk about what flower essence therapy is, our custom essences are made for the unique things that are happening with that person. If I had another person come to me that wanted to give up smoking, their essence formulation could be completely different because it's based on a pretty in-depth intake about what the is triggering that addiction or dependency or whatever it is. And um, and so that essence isn't just trying to, it's not a chemical formula to stop somebody's urge to for nicotine or whatever. It's going at it in at a vibrational level, going in and working with that person's soul to rebalance where things went off to trigger the need for self-medication basically.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really good point in that there's, we're kind of trained from the allopathic approach of I have a headache, I go get an aspirin or whatever painkiller that we might look at. And so we'll classify what our problem is or what the issue is and go, well, what's the thing for that?
Yeah.
and and isn't that perplexing when we don't have that match for match? Now we're working in the realm of, okay, well, I hear that you're feeling like you want to smoke. Well, what's underneath that? Where did it start? Where did it originate? And how do you feel when you want that? And those are the underlying issues that we'll be meeting with the essences rather than this is the contrary for this problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good conversation to have because it's a new way of thinking about things for a
Yeah.
lot of people. What else were we going to talk about? About
Well, we were going to help people who, how to choose their own essences, talk about some of the ways that they could do that, right?
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. Yeah, I think that the first step is to define what the issue is. Like I mentioned earlier, that if you go through catalogs or online or whatever, you'll look at all the essences and go, "I need all of them."
Yeah.
But you'll definitely have better results if you really dial in and just try to pick one thing at a time that you really want to work with, and then maybe selecting, what do you say, 3 different essences that kind of would work on that. One essence
Yeah.
is incredibly powerful when you really get a good match. But if you can't quite pick one, then let's say maybe 3 to 5 different
3 to
essences.
5. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good
I
starting point.
I tell people don't go higher than 5 if they haven't been used to working with them. And that helps, and it should always be as you say, define the issue. It should always be for the same goal.
Yeah,
So it shouldn't be multiple, no matter what the number of essences is that they want to combine, it it should be for the same purpose,
yeah,
not try to deal with different issues at the same time.
yeah. And I guess I when I'm working with a client and we've kind of come to the end of a consultation or towards the end of a consultation, when we talk about intentions, I'll be interested to hear about your intention, how you work with clients. But I'll usually start out by asking, okay, are there words or is there a focus that you want this formula to come through for you? And my practice of working with intentions, I got from reading Cynthia Kemp Shearer's work from Desert Alchemy, which she has an amazing line of flower essences, all from beautiful desert plants. And she has that quality of talking about creating an intention statement. And for me, the intention statement needs to be a little bit of a reach, but not something that sets off your bullshit meter.
Mm.
So if I'm saying, something that's really not true, even if I want it to be true, if it's so far from not being true, it sets off my meter. It's not going to be a helpful intention statement. I think an intention statement should be a little closer to reality, and you can sort of settle into it a little bit more. How do you feel about them?
Yeah, exactly. It 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 can't be too off the out of the realm of the possibility that's in that person's mind,
Yeah.
or they won't believe it.
I know. I remember working with one woman one time, and she was in a really rough place. I think she had just gotten divorced and just moved and was sort of between jobs. And, her life was in a really difficult place. And she had been talking to a coworker or somebody who told her about intentions and had given her some words to say. And it was like peace and gratitude and joy. And she said that to me. And I just went, is that anywhere near where you are right now? And she burst into tears.
Mm,
And that's a terrible intention because that's just going to make you feel horrible. I,
yeah.
I tend to like to lean towards maybe if you really want to have those words, maybe make them aspirational, meaning like, I am feeling more, whatever this quality is, every day. I am feeling more peaceful every day. And so you can say that to yourself without having it turn your stomach and feel horrible.
Yeah, absolutely. And then relate it to what they're going through. Um, if they're dealing with fear, then it's, sort of the opposite of that, an intention that is, I feel safe, as I breathe right now, or something like
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Right. A positive statement rather than I'm not afraid.
Mhm. So for people who don't know about affirmations, it's not I want to be safe. It's not it's I am safe or I feel safe. It's in the present moment, and it's may sound silly to some, but it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And then what is interesting is how it's found, I did this in the early 90s. I did this Louise Hay, women's group with learning to say these affirmations. And there's more to it when you really work with it. It's not just saying the affirmation, it is looking into your belief systems and what formed those belief systems. But I love how so many flower essence practitioners work with affirmations. It seems like they've found a home together, don't you
Mhm.
think?
No, I agree. I don't think everybody does it, but I find it to be really powerful.
Yeah.
And it helps to focus the mind because we really love to have something to attach our mind to, rather than something kind of vague, like it's just a drops and I'm taking it from a bottle. It's more, I'm really connecting it to my intention and what I really want out of this. So I think
Yeah.
there's a real value in doing that.
Right. And it's just a technique, one of many but it gets you into having that intention. And I think then the flower essence formula was made with an intention. And then once those two intentions sort of match or vibrate together, like your analogy with the singing bowls, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really awesome. There are a lot of other ways of selecting essences, and I think we all started probably with repertories. I don't know if you started with a repertory, but I certainly did. Reading through the Flower Essence Society has an amazing repertory of all the different possible issues and all the different essences that meet that. That's a really good way of selecting an essence for yourself. Now, whether that's an online repertory or a book, it all depends on what works for you. Have you ever used the image cards? Have you ever worked with those?
Oh, yeah. I think I have every flower essence deck that's ever been made.
That can be a really great way of working with the essences. Even with working with clients, if you can show them the deck and just sort of fan them out, and they'll just pull cards of what sort of interesting. And then also, I think that repelling thing is also really useful. So if they see one that they like, ugh, don't like the looks of it, there can be a message in there too.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, people can look at pictures of flowers and see what they're attracted to, and whether those are on cards or on the internet or on the bottle. As you say, you have lovely photographs of the flowers on the bottles of your essences, and so does FES and a number of other makers. And it just standing there in the store looking at the rows, what jumps out? What jumps out? What flower jumps out? Maybe it's not even the picture, maybe it's the name.
Yes, the
Uh,
medicine is in the name too, I think.
mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, you can really, just saying them out loud, you're invoking their presence. So
Mm.
that can be a really useful thing, depending on what your what your wiring is like. Maybe you're more auditory than visual. So saying the name can be a really great way to bring that poetry of the essence into your life.
Yeah. And I find people do That repertory that FES put out is incredibly valuable, um, especially for folks who haven't worked with them before, because it lays it out not just by the flower essence name, but by the soul issue or emotional issue,
Yeah.
and has a really lovely cross reference.
Yeah, it's an incredibly useful guide. I don't know what we'd do without it. I just love the folks from FES and the intention and real quality that they bring to the world of essences with all of their essences and their guides. It's just a wonderful place. I think.
Another, oh,
Yes.
oh,
Are you going to move on to a next one?
I was going to say just another way that is I ask people what their favorite flower is.
Yeah. Yeah. And even, it doesn't even have to be a noble flower. It can be something really
Yeah,
small and delicate, a
whatever.
little wildflower. I oftentimes, when I'm working with a client, like to find out what their favorite ecosystem is. So
Mhm.
maybe they love going to the desert, or they love the mountains, or they love to go to Hawaii. Then a lot of times I'll try to put some essence from home, a place that feels like home to them, into that formula. I think is a nice way to link it in. And I'll do that with animals too. Whenever I'm working with, say, a Mustang, I'll really try to include something from the desert or something that fits into an ecosystem that they can recognize. I found it to be really powerful.
That's really fascinating, Kathleen. So it's almost working with someone on a DNA level from their environment.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, DNA level, or just for me, it's just that sense of home. It's that sense of this is where I'm from. So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess that it could be kind of like that DNA of ancestry.
Yeah, that's where my mind was
Ancestry.
going with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I think that's exactly right. I just hadn't thought about it in those terms.
that's cool.
But yeah, it's pretty cool. But also finding out what place somebody might not like is also useful. So I remember having a conversation with a client, and I was saying, "Oh, I'm thinking about this plant from Hawaii for you," and she just went, "Oh, I don't like Hawaii at all." And I thought, "Well, that's really interesting." And of course, I don't want to put something in there that's from Hawaii if you don't like the energy there. So we moved on to somewhere different. That's kind of one of the beauties of flower essences, and having a lot of essences to access, that you don't have to be stuck with just one area or one ecosystem. Well, this has been great. Are there any other pieces that you can think of that we maybe have forgotten, missed out on? I think we covered a lot of ground.
Well, I know we did cover a lot. There's so much ground to cover. I know we're going to talk about um, the more about how they're made in another episode,
Yes.
and about different brands, and then also look a little more deeply about how they work and sort of the nuts and bolts of that. So for this, yeah, I think we've done a pretty good job, I hope, in explaining what they are, what they are not, how we use them, how to pick them, and the best ways of taking them.
Yeah, I agree. I think this has been a good starting kind of a 101 of how to get going with flower essences. And I would just say stay tuned, because there's a lot more to come. We have a lot more different topics to talk about that can kind of help get you deeper and deeper into the world of flower essences.
Yeah, can't wait.
So until next time, bye now.
Bye bye. You've been listening to the Flower Essence Podcast with Urkana Feld and Kathleen Aspens, and we appreciate your interest in connecting with nature on a deeper level. You can find us online at thefloweressencepodcast.com or join us on Facebook and continue the discussion.
This podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only. We are not physicians and do not diagnose, prescribe, or treat medical conditions. Please consult with your own physician or healthcare practitioner regarding the suggestions and recommendations made by the hosts and guests of the Flower Essence Podcast.